Thank you very much for the kind introduction. For the time being, use can be much more often. I think I would do you. Okay, my title has the association that is going to be a session with the life celebrating energy in the song "There's No Business Like Show Business." I'm afraid I have to manage your expectations a little bit. This is just a talk about future possibilities for enhancing access and use of cultural heritage, as it is frequently done within research groups in computer science departments and projects where computer scientists are in the lead. So not as lively as you may have thought or would have liked, and maybe I would have liked myself. But and also, though I'm an outsider as far as Europeana concerns, I'm not a blithely ignorant person who doesn't know what the concerns of this community are. But still, I will ignore a lot of the concerns that you are working with on a daily basis. So in that sense, this is a light-hearted talk. As the subtitle says, my talk is about the added value that can be brought to metadata through metadata mining. And of course, these terms are also quite abstract. So let's bring you to the overview of my talk. If you take as a starting point the wide-scale aggregation of content that is taking place in the context of Europeana, but also elsewhere, there's lots of multi-issues coming up that are reflected in the metadata structures and in the modeling and of metadata, etc. But all these complexities that are being added day by day are also having an increasing potential for what I call knowledge discovery. So part of the debates on, in this session at least, and the panel discussion of this afternoon will certainly be about the role and the limitations of a Europeana as a search engine. My presentation is not so much about the search functionality, but about the steps that are a bit ahead and that could be called knowledge discovery on the basis of content. I'll try to make this less abstract by talking about how this potential is being discussed among researchers that label themselves as humanities researchers, sometimes called the community of digital humanities. Some call it computational humanities, but you will understand easily what I mean. It's the kind of research groups that base their research on digital collections and that need all kinds of support from ICT to make a shift in their way of working and to be able to do more than they could do before in the era where there was only non-digital content available. Well, after that use case that I describe, I will say a little bit more about how rich a source, a gold mine, metadata is, and how it can be beneficial to start mining that as well, and not just do content mining, but also do metadata mining. So just to recapitulate the complexity that is inherent to aggregated content and the implications for metadata. First of all, there is the issue of multi-layering. There's much more metadata than just the ones that we used to call the tombstone metadata, the things that are persistent over time and that can already be encoded at creation time. But given the fact that lots of content collections don't just have digital metadata, but also digital objects, there's a lot of potential for additional metadata coming from the full text analysis or the full content analysis. And of course, there is the impact from free text annotation, which is different from labeling based on thesauri. There's also additional layers and additional complexity coming from the fact that collections can be in various media formats. There's, of course, always text, text, and more text, but there's also spoken audio, videos, still images, maps, music scores, numerical data, sensor data, becoming more and more important if you want to take into account the way users interact with content, census, which should be with a C, census data, etc. Another source of complexity is the fact that content can be described from various perspectives. So there's the local context, but of course, a certain object can be described in multiple ways if you take the perspective of various disciplines. For example, one of my favorite topics is the indexing of interview collections. And if you take that type of content, you can take the perspective in indexing of an oral historian, but you could also take into account the things that can be found in that content and that deserve to be indexed from the perspective of social studies, for example, psychology or interaction patterns can be studied by all kinds of other disciplines than oral history. And of course, there's the multilinguality issue that you all have heard about a lot. And then there is something that is maybe less widely debated. That's the uncertainty that enters the metadata structures if you can annotate something in multiple ways. So if you can fill the same field in multiple ways. And of course, if you have human annotators, there can always be a difference in the way people annotate. So if there's multiple annotators, which you can have in the kind of complex world that we are living in, then there can be multiple values for the same field. Something similar happens if you start working with automatic annotation of content. Then there will be statistical models, for example, coming from speech recognition or OCR modules, and they use noisy models, or let's put it differently, probabilistic models. And there's always a risk, and a considerable risk, that there is an error in the suggested annotation. So that's something that has to be taken into account as well. And of course, there is the usual dynamics, which starts increasing in the case of aggregated content, that the context of the collection may change, and the use of the content can play a role in that as well. So that can also add to the chances that there are multiple values for a certain field. As said in my introduction, I think that this complexity, in a way, is a very good basis for starting to explore all that content for not just access or inspection of and small-scale comparison of individual items, but to start doing something which is normally called knowledge discovery. And if you take the perspective of collections, then you can find patterns in there. You can start looking for trends. You can looking for hidden sentiments. You can look for, if you take a temporal or a diachronical perspective, you can look for changes over time, etc. And then the focus of attention is no longer the individual item, but it's the collection. And that is a perspective that triggers the use of statistical models. And of course, in a way, the perspective that I bring in could be seen as one of those hammers that is looking for, or that is taking anything that comes across as a nail. But from experience, I know that a strong collaboration with users may prohibit the risks that are inherent to technology push. I'll come back to that later. So knowledge discovery for digital libraries is about tools that automatically detect and capture various semantic layers and feed that patterns back into the metadata structures. So it's, in a way, another source for enriching metadata structures. So the goldmine itself can be enhanced once again. And as said, discovery is not the same as item finding. It has, for various research communities, the added value of giving room for serendipity and for something that is often called data-driven exploration. And this links to a paradigm evolution that has taken place in natural sciences, but that can also be observed for, call it, information sciences. So that's the shift from experimental work based on direct observation or direct interpretation to theoretical modeling, to computational modeling and data-intensive computing. And well, this is typically something that in certain domains humanities researchers are waiting for, because they have the strong intuition that the kind of collections that they work with can contain much more information than they themselves can think of beforehand. So they are desperate to see the emergence of tools for content exploration. So I'll talk a little bit more about the characteristics of humanities research that can be supported by ICT. So one important characteristic of this field is that it has often a comparative perspective. Some would say any scientific field is characterized by comparison, but certainly this is the case for humanities. They apply comparative perspectives both for quantitative and for qualitative issues. They are interested in the exploration of both curated content, and sometimes they create the content themselves, as is the case with the interview collections that I mentioned before. So oral historians typically have a topic for which they want to interview bystanders, people that have participated in historical events, and they interview them in a structured way to be able to study those testimonies in a way that is controlled. But typically they keep that data for themselves, and more and more people become aware of the fact that if they throw that data into the aggregated domain, like Europeana, much more can be done with that content. Of course, if there's more content, if there's more metadata, you also need content presentation tools that cover the multiple layers that are in the metadata. That also includes the presentation of the links to other contexts and to the context and to other related documents. And as said before, this is really something emerging, the data-driven approach for the humanities. So this is something where there is more interaction with the content supported by ICT. And in case you don't have a clue what this is about, you could take the example that was presented this morning, the engrams provided by Google that can show patterns in the use of words and terms and expressions over time. Because this is in a way a field that has only recently started and there's not a lot of very smashing results yet, I would like to also point you to a more simple result that ICT applied to digital heritage collections have brought and have stimulated, in principle, other researchers to set up similar collections. So I already talked about my hobby horse oral history collections, and we have a showcase collection, which is a collection of interviews with survivors of Camp Buchenwald. The material from these interviews has been transcribed by means of speech recognition, and these have been indexed so that the transcriptions are the basis for the index. This means that you can search on words that have been said so that you can, as a result, jump into fragments where certain topics have been discussed. And we've presented we've put all the metadata that was available, both the manually generated metadata, and the transcripts that have been generated automatically in one faceted environment. And experiments have demonstrated that the users like to explore all the types of metadata when they start exploring that content. This has inspired us to create more of this type of collections, and we recently started an initiative to start recording interviews in the Balkan area in Croatia and Bosnia, and hopefully in other domains as well, which would create a resource, an infrastructure, so you wish, for comparative research in that area that can be of added value for lots of disciplinary researchers from different backgrounds. This is just a screen dump of the search page where you can see a search field. You can click on something that gives an overview of the entire collection. In this case, it's rather small, so that's possible. Here you see a summary of a short summary of the interview. There's also the possibility to switch to jump to the full transcription, and if you jump to the next page for a certain result, you get the full metadata for this interviewee. And while playing the interview, you have a timeline that helps you to navigate through the interview. In itself, this is not very special, but it has learned us that if you start collaborating with people that know how to conduct oral history, you can be triggered to become much more sensitive about all kinds of aspects of metadata than you would have been otherwise. Okay, a little bit more about the typical nature of scholarly data. As said, there are multiple media types, including captions for image data, blogs, and other textual resources that may pertain to a certain item in a collection. In addition, there's all kinds of numerical and quantitative data, and there's multimedia. All these resources, all these media types can play a role in a variety of scholarly research. And if we zoom in on the textual research data, again, there's lots of heterogeneous material, and this poses a lot of challenges if you want to do automatic content extraction and link generation. So, for example, there are spelling changes over time, there is stylistic diversity, multilinguality, noisiness in content, and the challenge to link elements to other parts in a collection, including links that are crossing the media boundaries. Annotation, or creating annotation, is part of the daily work of a typical humanities researcher. In a way, you could say that annotation is the end and starting point of their analytical and comparative scholarly work. You could also say that metadata is, in a way, an equivalent to knowledge. So if you use that as a starting point for automatic trend discovery or link or similarity discovery or whatever semantic layer you choose as a starting point, then you create new knowledge based on existing knowledge. You help, another way to put it is you help users that have contributed knowledge to increase their level of understanding of the material that is there. And again, here are a few complexity issues. If you start thinking of collections and metadata along this line, there is the inherent possibility that metadata become more unstable because there can be changes in focus, there can be changes in methodology, there can be the impact of debate, and there can be the discovery of new contextual materials. And also, if you see this as an enterprise that is not directed by an individual but by a disciplinary group or a community, then there are multiple styles that can create complexity. For example, professionals like librarians and scholars will take a different perspective and will search for different levels of or for different layers of information than students or the wider audience is likely to do. Well, if you talk about metadata mining, then one important thing that Initial Steps has learned us is that what you want to do is you want to learn from low-level patterns in the data and the metadata, and on the basis of that you want to generate more higher-level features that characterize the content or the structure of the collection and the link structure across collections. So there are low-level features that you could try to detect, and depending on the kind of source that you're working with, it can be frequencies about word or average length of sentences, but it can also be the frequency of certain beats in music or an analysis of brush strokes, the use of color in art, and the frequency of combinations in general. These are all direct observables, so to speak. And if you want that to turn that to higher levels, then you will, in the end, be able to discover things like motives, for example. This is the kind of thing that we are currently trying to do in a collection of folk tales. There's a huge collection of folk tales in the Netherlands available, 50,000 stories with all kinds of overlaps, and that's the structure of overlaps and the travel of those tales. So the oral transmissions can be studied much more intensely if you are able to automatically follow those motives, or in other contexts that could be concept trends or sentiments. So in literary texts that can be very beneficial but also in other types of databases containing news, social media, or historical data. You could look for history of ideas or for the discovery of points of no return in a certain historical development. So suppose this is a field you feel inspired for, and you are able to set up collaborations with user groups or scholars in the field that have an interest in this way of knowledge discovery. What kind of text do you have to take? Of course, tagging based on human understanding is one thing. Then once you have tags available, you have the learning mechanism to do that automatically via machine learning, which I'll come back to later on. And then you can start detecting links automatically based on all similarities on all kinds of levels, and you can start classifying sub-collections that wouldn't have been seen as linked without those technologies. And of course you do this based on frequency measurement, and also you have to apply weighting parameters, because from a certain perspective a certain similarity can be important, while from another perspective, for example a psychological perspective, could be much more interested in the emotional layers rather than the verbal layers. So you have to take that into account as well. And then you have to feed that back into the descriptions and the navigation layers. Well, as I said, machine learning is one of the techniques that can be applied to this field. So it's a way of working where you you have algorithms that learn from patterns that have been detected or confirmed by humans. So you need trustworthy annotation as a starting point, and once you've done automatic classification, you need verification by secondary users. But given the fact that those models work better if you have more data, there is not just need for more data, which is often said in computer science. So if you have probabilistic models, there's no data like more data. But in this specific field, so in the context of cultural heritage collections, I think because of the condensed way that human knowledge is captured in metadata, you could say there's no data like metadata. So as said, in order to make a success out of metadata mining, there are a few crucial steps. You have to treat all annotation types that you can get hold of. They are an asset, they are a gold mine, and you have to learn how to integrate the various types and layers to exploit them for machine learning. You have to carefully design innovative interfaces and interaction patterns where users and those models can benefit from each other, and you have to keep the user in the loop to erase and correct errors and to ensure that the human intelligence stays on top of the algorithms. And of course, this all brings lots of discussions for the design of metadata models. The old debates on interoperability, but also ways to capture fuzziness and uncertainty and the change over time. And, well, as I said, this is beyond access, it's about discovery, but beyond discovery, there's also something else. If we are able to make a success out of this kind of work, and it will not be ready within a year's time, then we will increase the insight in relations between data collections, but we may also be able to increase the understanding of how knowledge is produced, and in particular how human knowledge is captured in annotations. And we may also be able to capture the essence of association and analogy. Yeah. Well, I hope this wasn't too much a hammer looking for nails, because I'm really convinced that if ICT people and people working with the digital libraries perspective work together, there are benefits in that enterprise for both. Complexity is interesting for computer scientists, so if you feed them with this complexity, they will start working for you. Thank you.